We're going to jump into it, and fortunately nobody has the room after, so if there are loads of questions about mobile IDs, and what we mean by mobile IDs, we're not talking about the stuff you're already familiar with and using in terms of on your mobile devices. We're talking about literally taking those identification documents that are in your wallet and replicating them electronically on your mobile device. So I want to make sure everybody has that context going forward. That's going to be the focus of this panel. And what I'm going to do is let each of our panelists introduce themselves quickly, and then we're going to go through and have them set a little context for us, and we can jump into questions.
Awesome. This is on? Yes.
Yes.
Thank you, Andy. Hi, I'm Nilesh Gandhi. I'm part of the product management team for digital identity at Idemia, and we're really excited to present some of the new use cases that we'll be encountering with the mobile ID as it gets rolled out.
Good morning. I'm Dan Dabrowski. I'm with the Identity Services Group at Capital One, and I'm looking forward to having a discussion with you all today. Thank you.
Hi, I'm Tom Lockwood. I'm representing the members of Secure Technology Alliance, and we do digital transactions across multiple sectors of the economy.
Hi, I'm Andy Bove, and I'm here representing the SARA program, which is a crisis entry, response, and recovery program sponsored by state and local jurisdictions. We'll talk more about what that means later.
Great. Now let's let each of the panelists take a few minutes and set the context. This is a new space for most of this audience, so this will help you understand what are the kind of questions we're going to want to engage with today.
Awesome. Thank you, Andy. Just when talking about mobile ID, as you mentioned, well, now I'll actually just use a visual if I may. We don't have slides, but what I'll say is what we're looking to do is transform the physical driver's license that you have, that you're all very familiar with, into a mobile driver's license, right? So a similar comparable rendering on your phone to articulate all the capabilities that are on your physical card. And this is a fully proofed government ID. There'll be connectivity to the state agencies, the DMV in particular, who will own the system of record, so all the data will be kept, safe and private and secure behind their wall. But that will have that connectivity to be able to access that data, represent your driver's license information in the mobile form, and that'll certainly unlock many new use cases for that. And just to continue setting the stage sort of for the identity ecosystem, really, at a very high level, there's really three primary participants or players, right? There's the issuer, the consumer, and the relying parties. And so from an issuer standpoint, that's the DMV. They issue the physical card, and they'll then now supplement that issuance of the physical card with a mobile driver's license.
And by the way, we heard earlier this week from the province of British Columbia, who's doing exactly that. They already have 30,000 live. If you didn't get a chance to see that session, take a look at the video. This is not theoretical.
Yeah, thank you, Andy. Yeah, definitely not theoretical, and there are other pilots going on within the U.S. actually as we speak as well. So we're really excited to see those lift off and that adoption to begin to take place. Getting back to that ecosystem, we mentioned the DMV. So the DMV, the benefits there for them to issue such a digital format is operational efficiencies. They can gain a lot of operational efficiencies by dealing with purely digitized versions versus all the plastic card issues. From a consumer standpoint, the benefits are certainly convenience and accessibility, as well as actually an argument can be made for privacy, right? Actually, with the physical card, and we can talk about these use cases in a couple minutes, you're showing all of your information, but with a mobile version, you can actually restrict some of that, what you share. And finally, the relying parties, and these gentlemen will probably speak more to it, but we certainly see that benefit there as an opportunity for them to take and onboard customers that already have been proofed at a high level of trust, right? So they can focus probably more on their core competencies and services that they offer to the consumer base. So I'll pause there.
Thanks.
Thank you.
Great, thank you.
Sure.
So when I think about digital identity and mobile IDs, we're really looking at a world and a digital world that was born from the physical analog world. And we've done a poor job to date actually bringing the methods through which we've brought or proven information about people into that digital context. So a lot of the things that we've put lipstick on, we've put glue on and tried to bring that into the digital world, and it's not working well enough. And it's caused a massive trove of information that has actually become a national security concern for us. It's a concern for our privacy, but to get to that future state, the one thing that we need to be very, very, very careful about is, are we doing something that becomes compulsory, or are we doing something that further stratifies people's opportunities in the world, in the digital world? So what I haven't seen enough of is academic research on the opportunity and the availability of mobile IDs to bring all of us, including the less affluent, the less educated, maybe the less technically savvy, into a safer digital state. And I think that's very important. We look at Estonia as a poster child in the identity space for EID. And when you look at the relative population there, 1.3 million folks, okay, that's about Richmond, Virginia, where Capital One was founded. About 200,000 adopters, okay, that's about St. Cloud, Minnesota. What about the rest of them? Who's actually looking out for all those folks? I think we're in a unique position here in the United States, given that we are so heterogeneous, we are so decentralized, and we have an opportunity to let the market forces dictate what will and will not stick. And we have the opportunity to look out for each other in terms of creating experiences that can ultimately go viral and that people can sign on to, and they can choose which experiences they want to simply prove or establish trust with the folks that they need to establish it with, and nothing else. So I think we are a long way away from this becoming a reality, but ultimately I think that the true north is there. And we have a responsibility as industry to ensure that we're doing this to make sure that people are secure, they're safe, their privacy is preserved, and ultimately consumer choice is what's going to drive this change.
Very good. Our community, when we look at our community, we had 4 core channels right now. We have in-person transactions, we have online transactions, we have mobile-based transactions, and we have machine-based transactions. And we're asking the interplay of how do we play between those. Originally, when we started with just person-to-person, identity was considered a vertical. Now when we start to convert to a horizontal, it comes a number of challenges and a number of opportunities. Part of this right now is when we start talking about a mobile driver's license, and Ademia is a member of the Alliance. When you have a mobile driver's license to an ISO standard, now we can start talking about a standardized approach of engaging relying parties and requirement setters. So as we start to go forward with the Alliance, we've partnered with AMVA for an engagement across some of the strengths of the Alliance. So the Alliance, we have the US Payments Forum that did the EMV transition. As we start to have this, on June 16th will be our July 16th will be our first engagement with the payment retail community, just to raise awareness about what a mobile driver's license is, what are the advantages, how does it change liabilities, what are your concerns with regard to privacy, and other key issues. So this will be the first time that, if you would, the engagements right now have been with the AMVA community, which is motor vehicles and law enforcement. Everything else now is open. So in this event, what we're also doing is proctoring the next workshop. So we have a number of people from the aviation community that they're going to start taking a look at this. So it will include TSA, DHS, some of the airport associations themselves, a couple of the airports, some technology providers, again, to start the discussion. And as we start to walk through the sectors, each community will need to take a look at the opportunities provided by this and the risks provided by this. So some of the pieces that are included within a mobile driver's license is the attribute, do you still have a driving privilege? Right now, when we're talking about that plastic card, when you're validating, you're not really validating in the state that you're in. Okay, there is no federation. Okay, so if you lost your license, but you physically still have it, you can go rent a car. Okay, so does this now present a new opportunity for the car carriers? Okay, when we talk about age-restricted transactions, cigarettes, picking up medications, okay, buying lottery tickets, buying alcohol, how will this work? And will work in a way that protects privacy and extends, if you would, the ability to make transactions and not necessarily be tracked. Okay, so the conversations now are just beginning. And like every other community, we're going to say providers on one side, and what's the ecosystem on the provider side and relying party side. We're just starting that discussions with everybody involved.
Great. So I got to do the compulsory, Sarah is about a unique public-private partnership between some government agencies, DHS and National Sheriff's Association, okay, and companies like mine that build the software to support that. I'm not speaking on behalf of DHS or the National Sheriff's Association. And I think Teddy Roosevelt said it best. Do what you can with what you have where you are, right? And so we have been solving the problem of allowing emergency responders to make risk-based decisions, okay, about who to let in and who not to let in after a disaster. In the absence of having a criteria, a basis for making a decision, the answer is always no. Right? So we observed this initially after Hurricane Katrina. Okay? Thousands and thousands of entities needed to get there to recover the community. All right? But the people who were manning the perimeter had no basis to make a decision, so the answer was always no. Okay? So what we do is we use identity in a lot of different ways, shapes, and forms, okay, as an index to get to the claims about that identity. Okay, is this person, been validated for these skills? And so as technologists, we tend to want to, solve things to the nth degree. This is very primal, okay? It's very foundational. I was talking to some people in the hallway earlier, and it says the number one need after a disaster, like a hurricane, okay, or a tornado, okay, is people who can fix truck tires. Because what winds up happening is they send trucks with people in, to reestablish the infrastructure. Okay, the debris causes those trucks to get flat tires. So I need people who can do that, who meet the criteria set by the emergency manager. So what the standards that surround Sarah are about is to allow you to describe risks in terms of the attributes of identities. So it's critical. We're doing this today. We're doing this in Louisiana, Mississippi, Alabama, Virginia, Massachusetts, okay, states like California, Utah, state of Washington are all very interested in this. The reason they're interested in this is because our business model is a little different. We give it away. Anybody who's in the public sector gets access to all this technology for free. Okay, I think I said enough.
Mm-hmm. Great. Those were great introductions. And what I'm going to do, just to set expectations, I'm going to start with a couple of seed questions. But as soon as I see interest from the audience in asking a question, raise your hand. I will have a roving microphone. We'll capture your question, and we'll start engaging the panel. So the first question, and what I really appreciated in these introductions is highlighting just how many long-term sociological and how many implications there are to communities, how many implications there are in terms of what does it mean to those that have devices and don't have devices. The most interesting thing, and I think this may be the first time that I've really had a good use case where somebody has said, you know what, this physical copy of this ID is actually less private than potentially the digital copy if the right privacy controls are implemented, right? And then you've also talked about how there are important questions about what does access to this mean long term, and does this help level the playing field, or does this create greater have and have not? And it might be a bit of both, right? So I'd like to invite any of our panelists to kind of jump into what do you think are the biggest sociological issues associated with this overall effort?
I can start with a couple basic examples, right? So with mobile IDs, I think with all new technology, I think there's sort of going to be this long ramp up of adoption, right? And that'll be both on the consumer side as well as the relying party side, right? Where's the incentive to take the adoption from a consumer standpoint? I don't have any place to use it, right? Where's the adoption for the relying parties? Nobody has these things to utilize. So that's kind of one thought process there for in terms of adoption rates.
What's the bootstrap that gets
exactly
ubiquitously accepted? Yeah.
Exactly. But I think I can kind of give three quick examples, and I think at least one of them touches upon specifically what your question was, right? What are the basic use cases? Because the title of this session was "Will Mobile ID Spur Revolution in Customer Service Interaction?" And revolution doesn't happen on day one, right? It has to be we have to look for the operational transformations of existing processes and existing workflows, and then slowly over time incorporate those incrementally and evolve them to get to the revolutionary stuff that's really different from what we're doing today, right? So three simple use cases. One is it's the simple "I forgot my wallet" use case, right? It's I went out the door in the morning, I went to work, I go to lunch. Oh, shoot, I forgot my wallet, right? Currently, I can easily go pay for lunch, right? Because I have mobile payments on my phone and I have a bunch of cafes, right? So the same thing will happen for identity, right? We're attacking that physical wallet. We've got the payment methods out there on the phone. Now we're going to take your physical identity and put it on the phone, right? So it's not only that you forgot your wallet and it's okay, it's that you can leave your wallet at home, right? And that's one less thing to carry, one less thing to deal with. So another sample use case is dealing with the DMV itself, right? Like how many people here enjoy standing in long lines at the DMV? Not so much. And so there's some simple use cases operationally with the DMV that we can enhance. You want to change your address, you want to change your name, you want to renew your driver's license. There's a whole process involved in that, right? You have to go to the DMV or mail a form in or fill out a page on the web, and it still takes 7 to 10 days to get that physical card back. With the mobile ID, we'll enable a quicker transition of that information, right? You'll be able to initiate and update those change of records directly from your mobile phone. You'll be able to renew your license. In fact, we can have a push notification that says, hey, you're up for renewal in a month, get on that. And once you do that initiation on the device, it's instantaneous, essentially, right? You might have a payment method linked to the app, and you can get your new driver's license or your updated record because we're directly connected to the SOR within a matter of seconds. So
you raise an interesting point with just physical locations of DMVs. Now, I recently moved to London. And one of the first things that I learned is they pretty much got rid of all their DMV locations, except for that one part where you've got to prove that you know how to drive, right? Those still exist, but they're very small. But everything else actually happens through the mail. Actually, the scariest part for me was putting my biometric residency permit in a physical envelope so that they could come back and get me my driver's license. And this is going to be further changing the nature of the game.
Definitely.
Would we ever get to the point where the physical portion disappears entirely?
So I mean that's an evolution that could happen. We see an overlapping period of time for quite a while.
Yeah, I don't think we'll ever see the physical card go away, right? And it shouldn't. The real value in the mobile driver's license is we're suddenly opening up these systems of record for verified information, and we're doing it in a way that's very easy, very rapid, privacy preservative, helpful with putting consent back in the user's hands. And I think that's the value of the mobile driver's license more than anything. So to the extent that people adopt it, then that's very good. But you still will need that physical analog in case you lose your phone, you drop your phone, you lose your ID card, your battery's gone. There's a variety of reasons, right? And then there might be times where just attitudinally we see people, certain segments of the population say, I don't trust this thing on my phone anyway. Like I don't want it on my phone, I don't trust it. And no matter what we do to build it and message around it being trustworthy, I don't want to start a fight with that person and make that argument. I'm like, fine, use the physical ID card.
What happens when your battery dies?
Yes, exactly. So I don't think it'll go away. And I think that's part of the conversation that we need to have is, how do we ensure that we don't just come up with another single point of failure, so that we have a variety of methods through which, when we need to, we can make claims about who we are and why we should be trusted.
There's a lot of things that's coming out of the conversation. So if you say we need to keep the card, why is that essential? Because pure bureaucratic drag could stop some of these programs. If you need, when you think about identity, cross-coordination between agencies. So one of the really interesting things that both Finland and Estonia did was to say, continue to evolve your physical cards, continue to enhance the security. We're going to continue with that. But at the same time, we're going to lay the groundwork on how do we collaborate across agencies to work these digital identities. That's one piece. When we start thinking about, we talked about mobile driver's license. We haven't talked about passports as well that are driving to a mobile device. As we start thinking about that, how does it make it easier to get through an airport? When we start thinking about the ability to authenticate rapidly, how do we change the quality of life and quality of service? And many times what we do is we get a technology that's new and we just overlay it to existing processes. So the question when we're thinking about digital identities, or how do we really think through the process? Now, we started the conversation to say some of these things are physical, in-person transactions. Some are going to be online, some are going to be mobile-based, and some will be machine-based. So the question is then why did he have to put something in the mail? Could he have gone to a kiosk and made the exchange? Was there something that he could have done from a mobile perspective? Do you start doing engagements of your business process at the convenience of your own home, especially in an ESL environment? You don't want to drag friends, families, neighbors to do something like go to a DMV and get the ability to drive a cab. Most of this, it's a much better transaction for people to do in the convenience of their home, and when they come up in person, well, fine, it's the core element of a transaction. But we deal with transactions that by law, by regulation, and by preference, we do it in person. Many of these can be done through a mobile device like proofing. How many people have to go to the local power company in person with the bill to prove that you have residency to get the power turned on? Why do you want to lose part of a day of work? That can be done through a mobile device, and it is being done. For students right now, some students will never go to a college. They'll do it all online. How do you know the student is who they claim to be? Well, now we're doing proofing through mobile devices. There is so many different ways when we think of quality of life and quality of service, but the basic steps is what's in the standard. What's the functionality for person-to-person, connected or unconnected transactions where you might need to have that? What's the person-to-non-person transactions, connected and unconnected? There's a lot of opportunity that's going to come in here. And then how do we have the FIPS principles and some of the other pieces we need to do?
You highlight a couple of things that I think are really important to point out. There are some of the highest friction customer service interactions are the ones that involve our physical identity. Having spent the last time that me and my wife went through the UK, unfortunately, because she's a Russian citizen, she doesn't get to use the electronic passport gates like I do. Mm-hmm. And we wait in line for about an hour and a half. Now, they just changed one thing that allows us to go into the UK line because of one small change that they made that allowed US citizens to use their passports, and there was a very small side effect that let us go, instead of in the hour and a half line, into the one that's maybe 30 minutes. And when you think about what happens when you can prove as you get on the airplane that you have the credentials necessary to clear you on the other side, and then somehow link that to your arrival, what extra value is being added by herding people into these small spaces? In theory, right, that's probably, I'm trying to come up with, what's the highest friction customer service interaction that's potentially solvable? That seems like it's way up there. We talked about the emergency situation where you need to be able to prove that you're allowed to go through. That's another really high friction one. We also, obviously, lots of banking associated things are fairly high friction, in part because of the know your customer laws, right? And actually, what is the state of your interactions with regulators with respect to, how is this soon to be able to be changed in terms of, can a non-physical identification document be accepted as far as your regulators are concerned? Or?
Well, that's just a great question. Who knows? Well, it's a great question.
So the answer, like many of these, it depends. Some states require enabling legislation, others don't. Okay, ABA, American Bar Association, has been working for digital identities for a long time on common boilerplate. And again, AMVA, working with some of the members here, have created boilerplate for states to consider for enacting. I'd like to go back over to the piece that he's doing, because I led that after September 11th for a while. I don't think that people understand how important it is that you have the privileges you claim to have. If you need 500 psychiatric nurses on scene at a big event, and it turns out that they were nurses, they're going to need psychiatric help by the time they're done because they were unfunctioning. When we talk about we need a firefighter 1 or firefighter 2, we need those people on scene. We need to have the skills. You want what you want when you want and need it. This is why this is so important. One of the things for our community here is, in a digital environment, no one can do a full response corporately. That's not the environment we're in. We rely on other people in other locations to do major recoveries. So if we have a larger event, we're really going to have to work not only in a physical environment, but a logical environment with first responders.
Well, absolutely, absolutely. And this is kind of, you file this on the You Can't Make This Up. I have to go to the motor vehicle in Maryland this afternoon because the real ID on my license is not right. So I have to bring my passport, my social security card, my proof of residency, the proof that I pay taxes. Because if I don't and I get pulled over, okay, and it doesn't pass that test, they're going to confiscate my license. Okay? For what did I do wrong? Right? So, and I think the major barrier here is identity, and the claims related to that identity, okay, have threads in policy and procedure at scales that are pretty phenomenal, right? So, for example, there are 3,500 counties in the United States. Each one of those counties has a sheriff's association, okay? And multiply that by 4 for the number of police departments, okay? Each one of those, okay, would have to be trained on how to deal with something other than a physical identity. Okay, if that's not a barrier to adoption, okay, I don't know what is. So how do you overcome that barrier? Okay, you overcome the barrier, but it becomes valuable. It makes their job easier, more reliable. Okay, I mean, you're never going to come up with a standard that they're all going to adopt. Right? I mean, just recently, in this published special publication about attributes for access control and how to do that. It's still in the early stages. Okay, but the people who could rely on those standards don't deal in that world, okay? These are people with guns, okay? These are people like nurses and doctors, okay, and firemen, okay, and people who drive ambulances, and people who fix truck tires, right? And so what winds up happening is you have to find a value proposition that inverts the problem. For example, based on what we've learned is now emergency managers can ask the question based on identity attributes and go, where are all the people who can fix tires? Not who are they, where are they? Okay, and are they close enough for me to make a risk-based decision, okay, to push a button to say, do this? Okay, and I use the tire thing because it's kind of foreign, when people wouldn't think of that, okay, but it's very, very real. All right, so I think the challenge here is, yes, you can mandate it. You can make it some statutory requirement. It just slows things down. All right, it's about attraction. Okay, if we can find a way to make digitizing this, okay, make people's jobs easier, more reliable, okay, it will be adopted. If we go, you need to do this, like you need to file your taxes, we all know what happens then.
So it sounds like this is a similar class of problem to just that basic how do emergency services communicate with each other on similar
Absolutely.
frequency bands. It's relatively easy to state. There's a lot of work that goes into aligning all the incentives to deliver it.
Absolutely.
Yeah, I think that goes back, Andy, to the regulatory question, because if we look at the way that alcohol and tobacco bureaus got their state legislation changed over the years, there's 19 states that have in their liquor laws that to prove someone's age, you have to use a barcode scan on that ID. Now, we all know that a barcode scan can be beaten by fraudulent documents, but it's in the law. So the liability on the retailer is gone. So they don't really care about stopping the underage purchase. They care about not getting fined. So those are the types of things, when they're hard-coded, really challenge adoption. So on the side of regulatory requirements to collect documents and to prove certain things like proof of address or residency, a lot of those high-friction processes are actually the most costly as well. So it's going to be incumbent upon those companies that actually have to go through those processes to make the case for why these things should be embraced. So it really will require close coordination among industry, including the issuers, government officials, regulators, retailers, et cetera. So we all really need to collaborate on this, but use the natural use case and the natural economic benefit, which is often driven by better customer experience, to truly bring this to a head and get that sorted out.
That employee onboarding is another high friction use case, right? With
You got
the
a question
identity
from the audience?
documents.
There's a question in the audience.
Oh, great. We've got some questions. Excellent. Let me grab the mic here so that we can capture these.
Specifically in the mobile driver's license case, what are the requirements around the receipt of the digital assertions? In other words, can I write my own app to accept those and present those? Are there any sort of mechanisms or requirements around how that gets stored on my device to prevent malware from stealing it and basically going after? I mean, we're hearing that malware providers are no longer going after people's passwords; they're going after the password managers. By basically install malware on the phone, compromise the password manager, steal all the passwords.
Now they want the digital credential if it exists there.
Right.
Yeah.
So, how what opportunities are there for a user to manage this outside of the sort of, not everybody has a smartphone, but even for the people who have one, right? How do they ingest that, and how do they use it, and is it under their control in the sense of how they use it, or is it under the control of some app that's somehow restricted? So I can feel like there's a lot of security issues here once that credential makes it onto some device.
Definitely. Security is paramount to ensuring that consumer identity is protected. And what I can tell you is that there's, in terms of what we're providing a solution that will be locked down, and I think similar to other vendors, they'll have their solutions, and we'll all be part of this interoperable ecosystem, at least in the initial stages. Potentially, there could be partnership opportunities that we would seek out strategically, right, to partner with other organizations that have wallets or other capabilities that also coexist on the phone that are also of high security measures. So we'll take those strategically one by one as they present themselves as the ecosystem evolves.
I was going to ask you, have there been standards set up by your organization?
Well, to the ISO standard. This is all part of the ISO standard itself. It's in review and discussion, so I encourage people to participate. One of the influences on this is because AMVA includes the law enforcement community. Very much like WIDI, people don't trust the identity that's on the device. They want a pointer to trust the identity represented on the back end. To say, when you pull up coming through WIDI, it's actually accelerating your antenna, bringing up the material from the back-end system, and then validating that to you, Okay, it's not on the device. In a similar way, when we're talking about an MDL, one of the features are, in fact, they don't want to trust an identity on a phone, they trust their back end. And that's the law enforcement influence within this.
MDL, of course, is mobile driver's license. You referred
Yes.
to WITI?
The Western Hemisphere Travel Initiative. So a number of the law enforcement people in their engagements, they trust their own system, their own back end. They don't trust the device that you're presenting because of fraud and counterfeiting.
Thanks. Speaking for the baritone section of the choir, I think that we all absolutely are on board with the value proposition of digital identity. And I think that mobile identity fits very much in alignment with that. And a lot of what I've heard, though, is just the value proposition of mobile ID, which really is just part of digital ID. The problem that I'm having is that today, from my experience and the folks that I interact with in the industry, we have a problem with the misalignment of analog to digital conversion of driver's licenses specifically, and the level of assurance we think we're getting from that. And there's a tremendous amount of misalignment with respect to that. One of the things that I've heard, and I'm really interested in, is bootstrapping mobile ID really starts with analog to digital conversion of the issued physical driver's license.
The proofing.
That's right.
Yes.
Right. Rather than the issuer issuing a digital claim. So how do we reckon with provenance of that? It's a converted license versus issued license, and ensure that we're raising the bar and not just repeating the same mistake in us providing more misalignment and assurance and driving to clarity on that.
Sure. Let's start off with a core piece that happens before that. I want to point out one guest just to tease him a little bit but Jeremy Grant over here. And the concept of authentication and the ecosystems, if you want to grab him later on, he's been a leader for our community for a while, okay? And again, with regard to this, I'm going to start off on the proofing. There has to be consistency in proofing. There's inconsistency, and there's a big distribution between proofers. And there's a big liability difference between a public and a private proofer. One of the things that we looked at is all the different kinds of proofing, including internet-based proofing. Okay, so one of the questions is, how do we standardize and think about proofing, in-person proofing, database proofing? Then we're saying, okay, in starting that process, when do we start binding, and what's, if you would, the assurance? And again, the reason why I'm pointing to Jeremy is the fundamental work when we talk about the new 863. When we think about how do you bind, at what level of assurance did you prove, and at what level of assurance is the device that you're applying it to? We're in a community that's used to understanding level 1, level 2, and level 3 security features on a document. How are you going to be applying holographic print? That's out the window now. So there's a number of issues.
And I think we've seen this problem before. Okay, for those of us who live and work in Washington D.C., we all know what a PIV card is. Okay, and that how do you take the information on that real PIV card, derive the credentials, and put it on a mobile device? Mm-hmm. Sounds very familiar. Okay, that has been an evolving challenge for many years. Okay, some people may claim it's done. I respectfully disagree. Mm-hmm. All right, but I think it's exactly the problem that you articulated. Is how do I take something real, okay, and derive something from it, okay, and guarantee that it has that that forward and backward pointers. Okay.
It's really about the integrity of both the analog systems and the digital systems. And in some respects, what we've learned in the digital world has created a lot more integrity over time that has, the gaps that have existed in the analog systems we're aware of, but we don't necessarily have as complete a solution. And yet we're aware in both worlds that there isn't full integrity for either in a 100% holistic way. So there's movement that's going to happen on both sides. This is a fascinating I love the CAC-PRIV comparison because anyone that's worked in that space knows how quickly the frustration builds, right? And if that very narrow effort turned out to be extremely high friction, how much more is this overall effort?
And I think you made a key point, full integrity. Sometimes you don't need full integrity. Sometimes you can make a risk-based decision, okay, based on the information you have. If you're willing to have that tolerance, okay, all you've done is minimized your risk. Okay, you don't have to eliminate it, you just need to minimize it. Okay, and that is critical, okay, in making decisions about, is this the right person to let in? Because all they're trying to do is not protect the bank, they're trying to make sure that the right people get to the right place to do the right thing at the right time.
I can't emphasize how important this point is. If you come out here and you say, oh, we can't do anything until we got full integrity, that's like saying, oh, we can't do any of this electronic world until we solve the global PKI problem, right? It's literally the same class of problem. And so the way through this is to be able to focus on where are the needs aligned and where do those feedback loops have integrity and how can we leverage those for adjacencies, right?
Yeah.
Exactly how that bootstrapping happens to get approaching something more full integrity over time, that's the trillion-dollar question.
Yeah. Just to pick up this part, for anybody who's interested in this topic, we did a series that's on tape and available online. The first part we said, how do you get an identity to a mobile device? And we work with AMVA and the suppliers to say, here is this for a moderate assurance architecture. We also work with the Federal CIO Council to say, and here's how derived credentials are done. Then we work with the access community at large to say, how are they consumed in physical and logical environments? Then we work with different communities of what they thought their preference was. The Transportation Council for the transportation authorities here in North America. We work with the Health and Human Services side, and we work with the banking side. And what they're looking at mobile device and mobile identity is not consistent. Some are looking at identity tokens. They're not looking at true identities. Some don't want to have true identities. Then when we looked at this, we also looked at the innovations that this is providing through a mobile device. As we said, not only just for the education and remote proofing, but your airport experience. Your airport experience is going to change. You don't have a little blue dot to follow in any structure to get you to the room, the plane, the gate that you want to go to. That will change.
One point on this.
Okay, and then we'll get to our next question.
Yeah, I think there's an evolutionary nature to this, and I think Forrester did a great job capturing that in the recent report that they put out on decentralized identity. I think you'll find some organic opportunities where what we can do today, what we can do to make a new customer interaction, to bring mobile driver's license more relevant, you'll see that start to organically grow. And as that happens, we'll start to see greater cross-collaboration between the way that we consume these things, and ultimately it'll empower the consumer to choose.
And can I just add one thing to what Tom said, because about that travel experience, that's definitely one of the more revolutionary side use cases, right? We have a concept called couch to gate, yep, right, where we streamline the ability for a consumer to do the whole booking, check-in, and terminal activity.
Including baggage.
Including bag drop as well, right?
And there's enough money flowing through jet travel in general that in theory you can pay for.
And you can imagine that extending to car rental and hotel as well to really complete the picture of travel.
But that point that you've raised, who's paying for it? What's the value? And when we start bootstrapping, do you pick the retailers and the merchants around their restricted transactions because that's where their liability is at? Do you pick the aviation side because are you going to accept the mobile driver's license at a gate? When you start seeing this, and as that goes, it becomes real for the other parts of the ecosystem. So the question is what's the most valuable use cases for your community, your customers? And how do you start engaging that with the rest of the community? Because you can't do it by yourself. No one group, no one company, I don't care how big you are, no agency is going to solve this. It's an ecosystem.
So I've got to do two things. We've got a question here, and we'll take a few questions because we can, because we don't have anything afterwards. and I think this is a really engaging topic. But I do want to let people know that officially the session's over. You won't miss Steve Wozniak quite yet. The doors don't even open until 22. But we are going to continue on for a few extra minutes.
Thank you. So it seems proven provenance to a good enough level is really a key point. In old school plastic technology, we're able to prove provenance to a good enough level. And the great thing about that is it's peer-to-peer, right? There's no phone home problem. So I'm curious on your thoughts on how you prove provenance using mobile technology, but preserving the privacy that you have with plastic. You know, we don't want to phone home to the DMV.
Well, you're saying the plastic is actually more private?
From the perspective of DMV doesn't know when I present my driver's license to you.
Oh, okay.
Right?
Yeah, I think you're making an assumption there that
Yeah.
some of the panelists may want to refute. So let's jump into that, and then we'll come back.
So if you're talking about the risk of being tracked, your activity being tracked when you're using your mobile ID versus, you're right, the plastic card has no kind of tracking ability necessarily, right? I mean, although you could maybe argue barcode scans and there's something on the back end there. Yeah, I mean, right now we're really not interested in doing any of that. IDEMIA ourselves doesn't track any of that. You know, and a lot of the communication and some of the verification of the mobile ID will happen purely device to device, so there won't be any online connectivity to the back end at all whatsoever, right? Everything is kind of self-supporting within that verification activity.
And I'll personally never use a mobile driver's license as my only form of ID. I'll use it where I need to, and then I'll find where are my trusted relationships elsewhere to help manage my digital life. So I think that that's the way that I just personally feel that I would want to manage that when it becomes available to me.
So I think there's two ways of looking at mobile driver's license. There is the binding to that device where the proofing has happened on the back end, and there's something there that can be used, and NFC becomes the vehicle in most cases, or visually, right, for the person that needs to consume that. That doesn't have to be connected to a back end every time, and in fact, it could be up to the user to decide whether or not, or it's an agreement between the two parties where you're performing that transaction to decide if you want the back end to close that loop or not. One of the nice things that you actually have more privacy in theory than a physical one, because you can't control what other data that the person consuming that driver's license, that bar only needs to know that you're okay to serve alcohol to. They don't need your address and your full birth date, right? This is something you can do locally that you wouldn't be able to do with a physical driver's license. You can't just put whiteout on there and then scratch it off again afterwards and have anyone take you seriously.
So we're in an environment where you're giving possession of your document to somebody else, whether that is they're going to put it into their reader or their scanner.
So,
Right.
but whatever the document is, and a driver's license is just one example, how do you prove provenance in that peer-to-peer model, right? That's going to be important. Whatever the document is, how is the reliant party going to know to trust it? But also preserve privacy, because phone home is where the correlation starts happening.
And those problems exist in the physical world just as much. They're just slightly different problems.
Right.
Where isn't the correlation?
Yeah, and you know, in IDEMIA's case, we have a business line that manages identity proofing and validation, and we've incorporated that capability within our solution for enrollment into the mobile ID app, right? So there's already that checkpoint, and that's what I was saying. It's it's a fully vetted government ID because it relies upon a couple things. It relies upon your existing document, which has an identity proofing step to it. It relies upon a phone binding to have an SMS to that phone and a deep link, and then it relies upon a liveness selfie that you take that matches directly to the government, to the DMV system of record. So there's a bunch of checkpoints through this enrollment process that truly validate that this is a true form of a valid form of ID on the mobile device.
And it'll also tie into when we start pulling in the infrastructure providers, the IDEMIAs, the First Datas, the Ingencos, the Verifone, again, a lot of the things that you've seen are workarounds to POS systems themselves. And one of the other questions is what parts of the POS systems evolve are going to be eliminated through the process. But the infrastructure people need to be part of this for that exact reason.
I have a question around step-up mechanisms. So somebody brought up the fact that you can make a risk-based decision, maybe on a self-attested ID, and determine whether the risk is acceptable for self-attested. But now I go to a pharmacy and I'm purchasing a Class 1 narcotic, or I'm getting telemedicine, or a police officer pulls me over and what's on my phone could be spoofed. It's just a digital image, could be spoofed. He'll need some mechanism to read that data from the DMV that relates to my real-time status. What step-up mechanisms are available, and are you looking to open source to potentially, use the carrier's Project Verify as a potential step-up mechanism, and other vetting services? Is that piece open, and are there other, because in a digital transaction, you may start out as being fine and need to raise your level of assurance over time.
Yeah, I was going to say, I actually just spoke with somebody from GSMA today about Project Verify, so that's timely comment. Appreciate it. And one could actually argue that it's actually even the other direction, right? That we can help provide trust to other organizations, right, from our solution, right? Yeah. So there's
the more data points you have, the better state decision you can make.
Exactly, the higher level of trust to that profile.
So when you think of the Canadian strategy that they're doing right now, that interplay between public and private, that the interactions actually build the reliability between the players as well.
So we actually put that in practice today. So what happens is an officer will scan something at a checkpoint, okay, and make it, it's in most cases, the indicator that comes back is green, they can go through. But the officer doesn't trust that, okay? He's uncomfortable about the situation. He can look beyond that, okay, and see what the criteria was in coming to the conclusion about green, right? At the end of the day, he always has the right to go, I don't trust you at all, you're not getting in, right? And that's fundamental to the entire risk-based process, right? So it's one of those things that dealing with law enforcement about this is most people who are skilled in that art, okay, know what's legitimate and what's not, based on the interaction with the individual. Right? So they're really not worried about, did you really talk to the DMV? Is this license real? Okay, it's more about the other criterias. Right? So one of the criteria is, do I work for Shell Oil? Okay, so there may be a validation step that says, when was the last time you spoke to Shell Oil and validated that this person actually does work there? And you have to take into account the temporal aspects of the data. And you would think that a company like Shell Oil updates their employee database in real time. And they only do it once every 30 days. Okay, so you have to take all of those things into account. All right? So to your point, you have that initial reaction, but if you don't trust it, you have to have the ability to look behind it.
Yeah, and just to add to what Andy was saying about law enforcement, that's another sort of in that bucket of revolutionary use cases, right? So it's, we're redefining the nature of the roadside traffic stop, right? Here it's, normally it's the officer getting out of the vehicle and approaching the pulled over driver. In the case of mobile ID, we have an opportunity for the officer, before getting out of their police cruiser, to send a request over the network, or even locally by the device to device, and request the license information from the pulled over driver. And there's trust that is generated on both sides of that. If the officer receives the information, they can do a background check before approaching the vehicle. And if the driver who got pulled over gets a request from the officer, they know that who pulled them over, that flashing light at 1 in the morning behind them is a true, authentic member of law enforcement and not an imposter, right?
There's two major pieces in this. Yeah. There's not a law enforcement officer that doesn't know, heard of, or experienced getting dragged down the road during a traffic exchange of exchanging driver's license. Everybody knows somebody who's died that way, okay, number one. Number two, Every major event that you see occurs during this interaction and the human interplay of exchanging this token. It's a very dangerous time for police. To get a little bit of extra standoff distance and to de-accelerate those situations, this is a simple tool that changes the quality of life and will save lives, just to do something this simple.
So take it a step further, the car doesn't even start if you don't have a battery.
Well, this is one of the discussions that people are talking about to say, well, but this is a discussion if you said, let's talk about 25 years down the road. We talk about smart vehicles and driverless vehicles.
So
that an
the use
element?
case was, because we won't pick it up in the video otherwise, the car doesn't start in that case.
So for a smart car, do you want the driver? Do you want to validate the driving privileges? Right now, we're mechanically doing it with systems that are applied on people's cars. So will this be an add-on feature? Will it be part of coordinating, if you would, what GM is doing right now with their cyber vehicles and their cyber strategies? Possibly.
I actually think there's another possibility that's more likely to happen, and that is there's some, once you get within a certain physical distance, what you would want is that the person being pulled over sees the request for their identification information, and it also shows, basically, if you allow that to happen, you would see the officer's information at the same time, so there'd be mutual benefit in that. And if it's rejected, then, of course, that escalates things.
And you take a heightened approach, right?
But then everybody's much more cautious.
But I think
right?
you need to flip it, right? You need to find the use case that makes it attractive.
Yeah.
Okay, and the use case that we've been talking about with law enforcement and emergency response is if you've ever tried to get back into an evacuated area, there are literally miles and miles of cars, right? So let's say in that backup there is a truck full of medicine. If you knew the truck full of medicine was there, okay, then the people who are controlling that access can do things to accelerate that. Okay, it's a very positive thing. Right now, they have to wait until I get there. They have to validate that, yes, I can get in or I can't get in. Right? So you can start making decisions based on information that you haven't even asked for yet. Right? So you take into account proximity and go, listen, I've got 5 trucks full of medicine that are 5 miles away. Okay, you can do things now to accelerate that process.
Best user interface is no user interface, right? This is a perfect kind of use case.
Yes.
You just make the right things happen around the things you want to get through.
You shouldn't even have to ask. It should just happen.
Something as simple as, do you ever see the vehicles on the side of a road after a storm, all the utility vehicles that are traveling? Do you know what the cost is in every major event? It's $21 to $23 million per hour. And these people have to start, if you see in the Mid-Atlantic, they're coming from Georgia Power and Light, okay, Florida Power and Light, Alabama Power and Light to come up. Now, one of the questions are, you're going to pay the day or two before the hurricane lands to get them there to start putting up wires the next day. And you have to do OSHA compliance. So at $21 to $23 million an hour, it's like that funny thing from Blazing Saddles. Do you want everybody to go through the toll booth? Okay. Do you want to start using IT combined back over with easy pass systems for the movement of people, the validation of the materials that they have? We have an electronic infrastructure that we can leverage. It's culture.
I don't know if I have enough time to ask a question. Everybody's probably itching to just jump to the keynote here. But anyway, so in my mind, like, it looks like there are 2 sides to this coin, right? One is very specific ecosystem, like, emergency response, which is probably, I'm not trivializing it, but probably easier to solve than, solving, kind of boiling the ocean problem of issuing mobile driver's license to all the consumers, right? So do we focus initially on these specific ecosystems and then, make some progress there? Or do we kind of talk about how do we solve this for a generic consumer? Because once we start doing that, we will run into regulations that have been brought up. It's like, who is going to trust who? Is this allowed by government at all? And those kind of questions. And these are much bigger questions, and maybe government needs to put up some PKI at some point, or come up with some kind of FDIC kind of a institution that can govern these things, which are much, much bigger, time-consuming things to do. We should do it, but probably back burner.
When we started, we attempted to solve the generic problem, and quickly came to the resolution that goes, well, this is too big for my brain, okay? And then we had the opportunity, okay, to apply the ideas to a particular domain, okay? In our case, that domain is emergency response. We've learned a tremendous amount in doing that, okay? And I think the challenge for us is to figure out how what we've learned in doing it in managing emergency response applies to other domains, right? I think, the concept of making risk-based decisions applies ubiquitously, right? It's just how do you narrow it down and come up with an application that allows you to do that. To your point, okay, if the officer doesn't have to get out of the car, he doesn't have to, he has to put his life at risk, okay? That's probably an attractive thing, right? Meanwhile, right now, if you've gotten pulled over, and I haven't said this applies to me, this is hypothetical, okay? The officer won't take your wallet. He makes you take your license out of your wallet, okay? That's policy. That's not him thinking it's a good idea. That's policy, right? So those are the barriers. Okay, so when the policymakers go, hey, there's a better way of doing it, they will change the policy. Yeah. Right? But to your point, maybe somebody's got a bigger brain than I do. Clearly they do. For us, it was when we narrowed it down to a real domain, a real use case, okay, and applied the principles that we've spoken about here today. There's real value. People use it today. People get benefit. People buy it.
Right, and just to speak to that adoption sort of protocol, adoption happens in unexpected ways sometimes, right? So, the pilots that we have, the pilot programs that we have engaged with a few states in the U.S., the initial set of users are the DMV employees themselves. They're the ones closest, right, to issuing the credentials. So that's one user group. But now we're going to find other specialized areas that, across the community at large that are really primed, and the need, if there's a real great need for it, then we're going to support adopting in those directions first.
Great.
No, I was just going to add one thing. What I really thought you were saying on this, too, was to say, so what when Apple or Google decides they're going to do an Apple ID or a Google ID that rides on the ISO standards, but they can leverage all of the data they have to say, yep, it's you. It's that identity has been in continuous use. Will that be a game changer? We couldn't do a mobile driver's license until we had the platforms where they're at right now. So is that an option? I will guarantee you that Google is already talking about that, and they've made public statements about that.
So to that point, right, I totally agree. Google does it, everybody is going to do it, and consumers will know there's a brand recognition, there's marketing, and all those things. But at the same time, it's not going to solve Capital One's problem of, are regulators going to accept it? Right? It's like, can a bar give me a drink based on this Google's watching on my behalf, right? Is that allowed?
Take care.
Okay, I'll repeat my question. So the question is, like, even if Google is doing it, there is going to be brand recognition because Google has done it, but still regulators probably will not allow it, or if they have not changed the law, Capital One cannot accept that, and the bar cannot give me a drink just based off Google's watching for me, right? So government still has to step in.
There are legislation changes for the state that need to issue a mobile driver license. Either the state already have that in their. So the legislation question for DME to issue a new credentials, either the current state have that provision in the legislation to allow to do that, or there are legislation in various states that in order to authorize the DME to issue a new kind of credentials.
So that's actually happening already. We already have 5 states went to pilot, and we have another 2 states gonna go issued, and they went through that legislation process to have that in the provision in the legislation at the state level.
I don't want to scare anyone, but we're already seeing the connection with social media when you cross borders, and the U.S. has certainly been quite aggressive at saying, okay, let me see what's going on with your electronic profile, right? So this is one of these things where there's nothing that says that there can't be linkages there. What the real question is, and the political question that has to be solved here, is how do all these things interrelate, and whose identity proofing should be applicable for what? And that's a political question perhaps more than anything else, and that those political questions take lots of time to resolve. And of course, we have political institutions that are completely focused on these really pressing technology human interactions, right? Not small trivial things like
in my experience, every jurisdiction in the United States has an emergency response plan. That emergency response plan needs to be changed and approved in order to adopt, okay, these approaches. All right? This is a complex bureaucratic problem. A lot of people need to sign off on it. Okay?
I'll leave you one last piece to consider. Right now, we're doing a series for another group that I work with that are for hybrid warfare. To say, if I look at in a digital environment with social media and identities and think about psyops and political dirty tricks that can be run by countries, individuals, groups, contractors, how will this work in an environment for, say, corporate CEOs and staff, critical infrastructure providers, politicians, anybody? Do you target somebody in a trusted environment and make them to appear untrustworthy? Do you target people in a moral environment to make them appear to be immoral? At a time that we can change, the soundtracks, the audio, the video clips that you have, the images that you have available, are we really thinking through what the true hybrid threats are? And what's interesting now on starting the conversations with the chemical industry, the tech industry, the transportation industry, and the banking and finance industry, it's really something we need to start thinking about. I would guess that most of the protective service packages for the executive leadership and critical personnel haven't fundamentally changed in 30 to 40 years.
That's an excellent thought to close on, and I don't want to keep people, now the doors are open, from heading over to the, I think, the most anticipated part of the show this year.
We'll see you around the block.
Thanks to our panelists. And